Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV, formerly IBM TV, World Edition. On our World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world and talk about sustainable innovations and what we can do to work together as a world to build back stronger and better after this pandemic. Today, my topic is a topic on our minds if you're trying to get gas, and that is the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline. In North Carolina, we are feeling the effects of this as there are already gas shortages and increasing prices, as this line does provide much gas and needed supplies of gasoline to the state of North Carolina and much of the East Coast. This made me realize this morning as I was preparing my monologue of how warfare is changing. When I was growing up during the Cold War, we thought of conventional warfare. And we've always thought of warfare as when we deploy forces into another country or we fire conventional weapons and the deterrence of nuclear weapons during the Cold War between the United States and Russia. As even in the 60s and 70s, bunkers would be prepared in case there was a nuclear attack. Which led me to the question that I want to discuss today with each of you. What would happen if China, if Russia, if Iran, if other nations just decided to cyber attack us more like this? And it's already happening in companies. It's already happened with our elections, or so we say, with Russia being the culprit. But it could affect our power grid, our utility systems, our infrastructure systems, our financial systems, and could lead to a virtual shutdown of our nation. What would we do in such a situation? And how can the United States be prepared? Well, one interesting thing I want to bring up today to talk about is the National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed this January, which created the Cyber Security Solarium Commission, a bipartisan panel that is established for us to defend America in cyberspace against cyber attacks of significant consequences. This is a big step because it actually brings cybersecurity as a national security issue for the United States of America. Now, before I close out my monologue, I want to bring up an interesting fact, where the Solarium Commission got its name, because I haven't heard that word in a long time. The White House on the top floor of the White House is a solarium, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower and several of his advisors would meet at the solarium to discuss how they would defend against the Soviet Union, whose World War II alliance with the United States had abruptly ended. A question that they would often ponder in the solarium is what would happen the day after a nuclear attack. Project Solarium actually issued a policy paper that became a key component of the American national security strategy. And today, this commission is being chaired by Maine Senator Angus King and Representative Michael Gallagher of Wisconsin. Who knows what the nation needs to do? I would like to advise President Biden to perhaps having a cybersecurity director at a cabinet level, similar to the National Security Advisor of the United States, or maybe a cyber director who reported right up to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Either way we look at it, folks, this gas situation on the Colonial Pipeline is another reminder that cyber warfare is here. It's here to stay, and it is an issue of national security for our nation and the rest of the world. On that note, I want to bring what better person to have on this show today than our Tech Talk Tuesday, Jay Glasgow, Brandon Scott, Mark Lee, and I hope all of you can hear me well. Can you hear me well today? I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. Do you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Well, guys, that was off the cuff. I came up with that on a quick run this morning and some jumping jacks, and not bad because I got my 12 hours of sleep last night. But with that being said, let's jump right into some of the things I talked about. I'm going to start with Jay, and then I want to hear Brandon and Mark's perspective about another cyber attack, another reminder of how vulnerable we are and what our nation can do and what cities can do and states can do. But I'm going to start with you, Jay. What is this notion of a cybersecurity solarium commission? Do you think this is a good step forward of America taking this more seriously in terms of how we address these kind of attacks?
Yeah, sure. to kind of peel the onion a little bit that we have before us, there's several components to this. Solarium has actually been around for a little while, and they had, as recently as last December, 26 different recommendations that they had made that we need to follow. They read a little bit like apple pie and mom and Chevrolet. I don't know that anybody would disagree with any one of those items. Is cybersecurity a risk? Yes, it is. However, I want to kind of question this notion of what if these countries like Iran and Russia, what if they just decided to attack us? I want to make it very clear that that decision was made 30 years ago, and they've been waging open warfare, not just against the United States, but against every other country in the world for 3 decades now, right? So this is nothing new under the sun. We've got some remarkable people already working in the government, have been for decades, on cybersecurity. And the reason we don't see headlines of this nature often is because they're doing such an amazing job. They're doing an amazing job at several different levels, primarily at the FBI level in the United States. But you also have white hat hackers that don't get credit for taking down dark hat hackers. Now, the question mark here is dark side, that's the group that's behind this current attack, or at least presumed to be behind this current attack. Are they the good guys or are they the bad guys? There's a thing called gray hat hackers. That's the people that are in the middle. And they will use their power to raise awareness of a problem. Think about the criticality of what they attacked here. They attacked a pipeline that's going to increase prices. What is that going to bring to question? That's going to bring to question gouging of people during a time of crisis. This is nothing new under the sun. You have an explosion in the Middle East, and all of a sudden, all of our gas pump prices raised by $1. A lot of thinking people will say, hey, wait a minute. It's going to take months before that impact to be felt at the pump. Why is it that the price just raised $1? Right? So FEMA and some other government agencies that will go out and district attorneys and attorneys general for states need to put the hammer down if people are exploiting this current crisis for monetary purposes, right? That's something that every watchdog group needs to be looking into. But what else was DarkSide trying to promote here, and when were they doing it? They were attacking oil when? In the springtime, when temperatures are fairly neutral, right? So they didn't do it in December. It was a ransomware attack. This is something that we're going to be able to overcome fairly quickly, probably by the end of this week. So just to add a layer of calm to the discussion, realize we've been under attack for decades. The people, men and women that are doing the good job of helping us have been helping us for a long time. Not every hacker is a black hat hacker. Some of them are gray hat. And we need to learn all the valuable lessons that we can from this current crisis. Those are my initial thoughts on it this morning.
Oh, that's wonderful. Brandon Scott, and I forgot, by the way, I always forget that one thing in Moloch, so Dark Side was the name of the organization. So, but I got off a little script there. But Brandon, what are your thoughts about what we're going through right now?
Well, I would think, I would say that the United States is tragically behind in its cybersecurity front. We spend a lot of money on planes and drones and bombs, and not enough money on cybersecurity. One of the things when Jay talked about was a ransomware attack. But there are a lot of attacks that we're really vulnerable to. The SolarWinds is a famous one, right? A supply chain attack. The U.S. government has a tragic history with technology. The way they contract and have the bidding process. There's actually a great podcast by the folks at Gimlet Media that they did talking about some of the challenges that the federal government here in the United States has with acquiring new technology and using new technology because of the bidding process and because of the process they have to go through to be accepted to create that new technology. So the United States doesn't, as a federal government, doesn't really create a lot of software, doesn't really create a lot of code. We use a lot of third-party software. We use a lot of contracted companies, public companies, private companies, materials, so it leaves us really vulnerable to a supply chain hack in our system. But I do think that at the end of the day, we should invest more in our cybersecurity as a nation. I don't think there's as much that we can do about it, as you mentioned, Steve, on the state and local level. The city of Brownsville in Texas does not have the budget to compete with the Chinese government. So they need some federal help here. We need some sort of infrastructure plan in the cybersecurity space. Because that is the only thing that is going to protect our data. At the end of the day, the hot buzz that everybody likes to kind of use, the analogy everybody likes to use, is that no one's wandering up to a nuclear missile and lighting a fuse, right? At some point, there is a computer somewhere telling another computer to do something. So a sophisticated or a complicated enough hack leaves absolutely everything open, right? All our medical data now is in the cloud. All our medical data, it's no longer on paper charts at the end of our bed. Even if that network is secure, it's only as secure as the best hacker. So, I think we do need to invest a lot more in our cybersecurity and our cyber warfare division. I think Space Force, all the ideas about space warfare, I think we're ahead of ourselves there. I think if we had invested that money in, yes, we need the satellites because internet runs on a lot of satellites, but we need to make sure that the internet that we're using, the connectivity using, the networks that we're using here at home are safe first before we invest in the kind of outward reach and furthering of that network.
Fantastic. One point I'll make before I hand it over to Mark Lee for some comments, and then a couple more ideas before we get into Jay's presentation. The first thing I want to emphasize, if you're listening in North Carolina, the governor has declared a state of emergency. But one thing cities don't realize is in North Carolina, we have a state risk officer, Maria Thompson, who reports to the Secretary of Technology and the governor. And so they can't send a National Guard unit out to do an assessment of your network. If you are hit by an attack, they say, don't pay the ransomware, let them come in. And I mean, so that's the question is, I just want to remind everyone that in North Carolina, and maybe that's something states can do, but I agree with Brandon, we need federal government. But Mark, money. But Mark, what are your thoughts about the cyber attack?
Well, actually, the cyber attack, it hits home sometimes, even when we're least expecting it. I was actually calling mom on Mother's Day. She's up there in Rocky Mountain. Of course, we were having different family things going on. So I was here in Durham and she was in Rocky Mountain, but I was catching up with her on Mother's Day. And she was actually pulling up into the gas station and had noticed that several of the gas stations up there, maybe about 6 miles from her house, had already put some, protective things around their pumps to let folks know that there was no gas at those pumps. So, like I said, she did find a pump that was letting her get the gas and all of that. But that was as recently as day before yesterday. So on Sunday is when that happened, and we were talking, and she was like pretty much sure that the reason that it was happening was because of that cyber attack, because she does keep track of the news and all of that. So, like I said, I was actually aware of even its direct impact when I was having that conversation with mom, sharing love with her and everything on Mother's Day. So like I said, it was just interesting that we're having this conversation when I had just had that conversation with mom on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and all of that. So definitely it's just amazing that a lot of times these things directly impact us. And I imagine that even though I haven't seen it, I've got friends that work at a couple of the gas stations around the corner from my apartment. I haven't seen that yet. I do remember seeing that in the past with other either cyber attacks or gas shortages or things along those lines. So I'm not going to be surprised if I don't walk by my neighborhood and see that happening even here in Durham eventually. But like I said, it's already starting to spread among some of our convenience stores and gas stations. So it'll be interesting to see its impact on our regular lives. We're already dealing with the virus and a number of other things that are going on. And this just adds another wrinkle and another headache in our day-to-day lives and everything. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and whether we see more and more of these pumps being covered and less folks getting their gas at their traditional sources.
Yes, and before I we're going to now hand it over to Jay. But Jay, one question, maybe we could talk about this towards the end of the show. Do you think a cybersecurity director would be an important cabinet position that the president could approve? Maybe we'll have your presentation first, but that'd be something I'd like everyone to talk about, because I think that given it's we never really thought of cyber warfare being something critical to national security, but I am quite concerned about how quickly the damage can be done. We may not lose lives, but our economies can be shut down in a matter of seconds. I'm now going to hand it over to Jay Glasgow to talk a little bit about his topic of the day.
Well, actually, I want to address your question, if I may, Steve, and we can bring everybody back in if you like. At Privacy Co-op, we try to connect the dots. And the federal government has some bad habits. They have some good habits, and they have some bad habits. I'm gonna pick on one of their bad habits. Whenever there's a crisis, they throw money at it. That's not bad. That's good. That's a good habit. Can be. But the problem is, the bad habit is they just throw the money at the symptom. They say, whatever that symptom is, we need to throw some money at it. In the case of Solarium, they had 82 different policy changes that they were recommending, 26 of which are likely to become law within this year, probably faster given the nature of this crisis, right? This is going to elevate this need, and you're going to see those 26 things going flying through the House of Representatives and the Senate in short order. Now, each one of those is going to have $1 billion plus price tag attached to it, right? So we're going to spend money. We're going to go out and throw some money at the problem. My wife works for the federal government. She works in nutrition. And, one of the elements of that is to make sure that people have enough money for certain needs. One of the programs that they track pays an average of $8 towards a certain type of supplement a day. It's always been enough. But a year or two ago, during a time of crisis, they raised it from $8 to $9 a day. Now, that's about what the supplement costs. It covers the cost of the supplement. If you can't, use the voucher, they just give you the supplement straight ahead. Now, what's interesting is during the COVID crisis in January and February, they upped that limit to $36 worth of that supplement. It's more than a person can take, right? So the question mark becomes, how are we going to distribute this? How are we going to get this out to the people? We're throwing too much money at this particular symptom of the problem. Now, if you look at their 26 recommendations, they're pocketed recommendations. But Steve, you just raised an excellent point. And that was, you told Brandon, hey, if your township has been attacked by a cyber attack, you need to call this risk organization. They will send the National Guard in and they'll evaluate your situation. Now, how did Brandon find out about that? Well, Steve Rao found out about that, and he told Brandon on a TV show. Is that the most efficient form of communication? Probably not. Could our government spend $1 billion, like take $1 billion to a Silicon Valley company? I want you to think about that, where their starter money is usually $3 million. Can you imagine what a Silicon Valley company could do with $1 billion and say, we want you to build a search engine that will connect all the dots within the federal government. When a crisis comes up at any level, can somebody type in who's in America and has the rights to do so, and connect all the dots and find all the resources that are necessary? So instead of taking money that's already probably overpayment towards a solution and adding even more money to it, right, we would start to connect the dots and have people who actually have the needs that have no clue how to navigate the federal government and find all the solutions, give them a tool, a resource where they can say, we're running out of supplement. Or, hey, we just got attacked by a cyber crime. Or, hey, wait, our social security checks are coming in wrong. Whatever the problem is, they could search for it and unleash billions of dollars of pent-up resources that we're already spending, right? That money's just going into the ether. So why not spend $1 billion and connect all the dots and create a search engine for the federal government that would help all the local municipalities, the state governments, and even the federal government connect all of these dots of existing resources and money to a current crisis and mobilize the forces? I don't know. It's just off the top of my head.
Well,
I think.
I can tell you exactly why, Jay. I don't want to jump in here too much, but I can tell you
please.
Exactly why. And as a privacy expert, I'm sure you'll understand and appreciate this. There are a lot of people in this country who do not understand the cyberspace. And so the idea of the federal government having access to their personal data, right? Well, the federal government knows your social security number. They know how much is on your social security check. But if that can relate to another branch of the federal government, and all of a sudden, a good example is we talked on the travel show about the COVID passport, right? The federal government already has your health records. If they wanted to access them, they could do it like that. They don't even need a subpoena. So the idea of being fearful of a federal government, United States government-controlled app or piece of technology that allows you to enter into the country because you're verified as having a vaccine for COVID, we're fearful of that. So there are a lot of people that I think don't understand data, and that fact that our data is essentially already freely given. I think your presentation is a little bit about this.
Yeah.
I never really knew until just a couple years ago that probably the most valuable asset I own, more so than any stocks or bonds or anything I could ever own, is my data, is my eyeballs, my attention, and my information. And I give it freely away to a lot of companies. I give it freely away to Google and Apple. Epic Games is now in a big lawsuit with Apple. They have my data too. That Facebook, all these platforms have my data. So I'm curious to know a little bit. You're talking today about data genocide. And there maybe are some people who would want to stab a knife through the phone book of their data and not share it anymore, and maybe they can call you at the privacy co-op and get that done. But tell me a little bit about data genocide. So all
Before
this
we do
data
that, I want to jump in because I had a good quick question that tied into that as well and everything. Because the other thing with data that I'm always curious about is there's always this conversation around the fact that there are apparently more than one internet. There's the regular internet that we all know about, and then there's the one that people oftentimes talk about, which apparently has more government controls and more of that. Some people might call it the dark web, or it has various other names as well. So is that also something that we need to be concerned about as well? Because apparently, there's the internet that we all know and are happy and love dearly and everything because it helps us get information out to our communities and things of that nature. But apparently there's one that might be a little bit more secretive, or at least that's what some people speculate and all of that. So it will I guess that ties into our digital privacy and some of the things that Jay's going to talk about. But I'd love to hear some conversation around that as well, because I know sometimes when I
Yeah,
talk
if
to
I can,
friends.
again, I want to connect the dots here between Mark and Brandon. What you guys just brought up was excellent. First of all, as far as the dark web goes, we do have a dark web today called the federal government, and they have more data on us than we could possibly realize. Every single time your social security number is used in relation to a medical event, the medical people may reach out to the Social Security office and ask questions to verify that information that's already been validated. That happens, right? That's a normal course of business. Well, if you think the Social Security office isn't keeping metadata on those types of requests, you're crazy, right? They'd have to keep them for non-repudiation and for legality reasons. They're going to keep track of all of those things. So they have medical data that's tied to your Social Security. What was the largest data breach in the United States? It happened about 19 years ago. China hacked our Social Security office and took all of our data. If you're waiting for someday in the future for China to learn everything about your medical conditions, there's no reason to wait anymore. You can go ahead and celebrate. They know absolutely everything about you. The secret's out. You know what is still secret, though, is the fact that Brandon just highlighted that every single component of the federal government has all of these different programs, and they're totally disparate and dysfunctional, right? We don't know what they can do. What we're suggesting, Brandon, isn't that the federal government come and tap into even more of our data, which, by the way, I don't think they can. They already have it all. But the question mark is, how do we know all the data they have and where it is? They are not required to abide by the same privacy laws of CCPA and GDPR. We don't have the right to go out and say, what data do you have on me and how do I correct it? What we're suggesting is not to do that necessarily, but a step in that direction, which is, can a municipality like Steve Rao as a city councilman, can he go to a system and say, we just had this crisis, and just like the Patriot Act 20 years ago, we set some of our own personal liberties aside because it was a good idea at the time. We said we want the FBI and the CIA and the local police to be able to share data to go get the terrorists. Well, we're doing something for a lot different reason here. We're suggesting that all of the different government agencies can share data on the benefits that are available for somebody like Steve Rao, a city council worker. That's not obfuscating what they're doing. That's exposing what they're doing. It's bringing transparency to the model. If a city council worker can type in and get a package from the USDA and another package from FEMA and another package from, some other organization within the federal government, pull it together and solve their needs, well, that's fantastic. That's transparency. That's government working for the people, by the people, and of the
Jay,
people,
it should
right?
be
let
working for the
me
people, by the
simplify this
people.
real fast, just to
Hold on a
kind of.
second. If I could just jump in really quickly and everything. One thing that I'm curious about is I am a big student of history and a student of particularly the history of the 60s and the 70s. My dad was involved in that to some degree and everything. So I do know that at one point the government had a program called COINTELPRO, and they definitely spied on a lot of our civil rights leaders and people of that nature. And some folks would say that that was justifiable and that they still should do it and all of that. Some people would also be shocked to know that there are still political prisoners within the U.S. right now and everything. But with people of different disparity views and everything, some folks might even consider AOC a socialist. I know I definitely have a friend here in Durham that's involved in our city council, and she makes it very known that she has some socialistic tendencies in terms of her political stances and things of that nature. So, is it in the mind of the privacy co-op and everything that people should have the right not to be spied on by the bigger government? Because I'm of the opinion that even in the 21st century, people probably know even a lot more about Steve Rao than they know me, because Steve Rao is a city council person and all of that. But I was just wondering your thoughts about whether they should have those kind of rights and along those lines.
Sure. Yeah. The problem, and I think it was Brandon that said this a little while ago. Our data gets gone. He said we're already giving our data over to these big tech giants, and he said I realize that I'm doing that. The thing at the Privacy Co-op, and this isn't our main topic today, so I'll keep it brief, but the primary core of information rights, which is the central axis to how we unlock all of this potential, is to realize that we can't own data. Data is like water molecules. You can't say you own an electron. You can't go into court and hold up a piece of data and say, I own this little bit right here. It's physically impossible. So what do you own? You own the rights to your information. Information is contained within data. So kind of take your eyes off of data as the thing. That's what makes all of this very complicated. When you realize this is as simple as data is a vehicle that carries some information in it, and you own the rights to that information. Well, now the conversation becomes a lot different, doesn't it? It's a lot like saying that all of these tech companies took a bunch of Taylor Swift songs and started monetizing them and making tons of money. Does Taylor Swift have some legal recourse? Absolutely, she still does.
She can re-record all her albums. I love I have to say, my favorite thing about being on the show with you is that that Taylor Swift seems to come up every time we're on the show. I think it's a great example because she's on the cutting edge of both the positives and the negatives of information, right? From facial recognition at concerts to using social media in ways that have never been done before. But I think the cornerstone, I think, of what we're talking about here, I don't want to oversimplify things a little, too much, because it is a complicated topic, is public versus private, right?
Right.
As a private citizen, if I choose to give birth to my child at a specific hospital, though the location of that hospital is going to ping the first couple locations of my social security number, and that's going to connect to a bank account. And actually, there was a viral meme on TikTok not too long ago where people figured out that if you added a 1 in front of your social security number, you could insert it as an account number with the local bank in where you were born, and you could withdraw money. And then, of course, the federal government would come in and shut you down because that was your social security fund, because it's that simple. And I think maybe one day, I think Jay and I need to do an episode on social security numbers versus national identity numbers, because we in the States have agreed that a handful of numeric digits is a good enough identifier of you as a person, and that number needs to be guarded with your life. And you can steal someone's identity, you can hack their social security accounts, you can do all these things with someone's social security number, versus a national identity card, which might have a more complex maybe chip and pin system that some other countries have. And I want to point out, looking backstage, Jay's brought up an image of one of my favorite baby boomer YouTube personalities who just wants to make a buck and have some fun. And I want you to introduce him a little bit here, Jay. So let me give my quick recap, and then you can fill in the gaps.
Yeah, go ahead.
This guy has made a lot of money by showing us that the federal government spends a lot of money in a lot of ridiculous places. And I'll let you fill in the gaps here a little bit, but he's made a career essentially out of, early on, the federal government would do a study on turkey farming. So he had a consulting company that would be hired to do a study on turkey farms, and he would do absolutely nothing other than call the right people. And we don't do that today enough. Just pick up the phone and call the office and say, the office of whoever, internal affairs,
turkey farming,
right? The internal affairs of some government agency. He would get the study, he would plagiarize it, rebrand it a little bit, and give it to the client and make a buck. And now he shows people how to use government programs to actually turn a dollar in their own business. But fill in the gaps here a little bit, Jay.
Yeah, I'm going to put a little more positive spin on this. There was a guy in 1918. There was a gentleman by the name of L.M. Barry, and he ran a printing company. And he didn't have enough customers. He was going to go out of business. And he noticed that people kept coming in his store asking him when the streetcar was going to run by outside. So he started printing up these little yellow cards. He used yellow paper because it was cheaper than everything else that he had. And he'd print up a trolley car schedule. Well, this became wildly popular. People were coming into his office taking these trolley cards all the time. And he was just giving them out for free as a service. But then he got this bright idea to start selling advertising on the back of the trolley card pages. And he started making a fortune doing it. He formed a company called L.M. Barry and Company. That became the Yellow Pages. And during the monopoly years of AT&T, they become one of the wealthiest publishing houses in the world. Every single year you would get a phone book, delivered to your front door, and it had all the current information on phone numbers, and they were paid for by advertising in the Yellow Pages. Now, what this guy did was just L.M. Barry and Company all over again. He took all of these governmental offerings that anybody could tap into, and he published a catalog of them. The problem is that paper print catalogs have kind of fallen out of vogue. What I was suggesting earlier is we spend $1 billion on building a new search engine to replace his paper catalog with a digital one that has some intelligence behind it. So when Steve Rao and his city face some sort of crisis, they can say, we're having this crisis, and it can tie in all of those elements. If you take his book, you can find the same thing probably faster than going through the federal resources. But even faster than that is to digitize what this guy did, right? That's all we're suggesting.
No, and that's a great idea. And there's actually a new version of the Yellow Pages that rolls through streets on a regular basis, and folks are using it. I actually saw recently when I was thinking about actually jumping on one of these vehicles and everything, and it's advertising on a regular basis. Now, if you get in the vehicle, you'll see even more advertisement, because one of the things that I noticed was I was recently out and about, was that the bus was rolling by, and that bus was advertising the fact that you can definitely, if you're willing to spend some money, and it's usually not as much money as folks think it is, that you can advertise your business and things along those lines. So there's that rolling billboard called the mass transit and everything. So definitely that's something that goes on here in Durham and Raleigh and a number of the other cities. And folks are actually seeing that rolling advertising, and half the time they're probably not even paying attention to it, but it's that subliminal message that goes through there. So, maybe there's an ad for, I'll just use a restaurant off the top of my head. There's an ad for Burger King, and it's lunchtime, and you're like, what do I need to eat? Well, the Burger King just went by. I think I'll go have me a Whopper or whatever the Burger King burger is and everything, because it's that subliminal message. I know we will definitely want to get to the presentation, but I had two quick points that I was going to make. One is that we're not going to tell your wife, but you have a serious crush on Taylor Swift and everything that. Oops, I think I just told your wife because she watches this show, but definitely we've noticed that and everything. And the other thing that I'm oftentimes fascinated by is folks that literally give up their privacy. And you may even talk about this in your presentation when we're talking about rights of privacy and all of that, because I am I've worked with Jatovia on the Gamers Den, and I'm also fans now of some of these people that are on Twitch. And while some of them are just playing video games, some of them are literally telling you what they're doing in their swimming pools, in their houses, in their lives in general, and really don't seem to have any care or concern about privacy. So there's this whole thing that you're talking about, the guy, and I don't know him with the question marks, but there's this whole new fan of folks that basically have given up on privacy, and they're trying to collect some money. That's part of why they do what they do, by using these Twitch streams and getting money, whether it's cyber currency or because some of them are now accepting cyber currency. I just realized this when I went on one of their pages, I think it was yesterday, but definitely they seem not to even care about privacy. So what is your message to those folks? Because there's a whole lot of internet stars out there that basically are letting you know everything about their lives.
Sure. My message to all of them is, and changing the subject from Taylor Swift as fast as I can. There are lots of rap artists that are upcoming. I used to live in Atlanta, and I couldn't walk downtown without having, a rap artist approach me with a CD, and they would give you a free CD. Now, when they did that, were they giving me data? Absolutely. Were they giving it of their own volition? Absolutely. Did I now possess a copy of their data? Absolutely. Did I own the rights to their songs, and could I monetize it? No. So how can the average person watching this TV show start to make claims of their own and say, look, I gave Facebook my data, but I still own the rights to the information that's contained within it? How do they step up and say, I have a claim to make against Facebook, and Facebook needs to stop using my data for monetization until we have an agreement in place, a licensing agreement in place? Well, you can do it individually. You can go through every single privacy policy that you want to and look at how to opt out. And you'll get companies' attentions when you start doing that. Or you could combine your forces with a whole lot of other people just like you, and together we could all make a single claim to Facebook. That's going to be even more powerful. We'll have great attorneys working for us, etc. Gee, how do we do that? Well, we form a cooperative association. Privacy co-op. That's exactly what we do. That's what we do every single day of the week. So if your viewers want to come out and join us, that's what we do. You can go through and opt out from these businesses using your information that you own the rights to until they agree to our licensing, right? Which is collective across the board. It has a lot more power and a lot more weight. I hate to bring up Taylor Swift again, but she might be a member of BMI or ASCAP, and that rapper on the street isn't. So what we're suggesting is, hey, we're all rappers on the street. We need representation. We need agency. We need authorized agency. Join a cooperative association like the Privacy Co-op that are set up to be authorized agents, and instantly you elevate yourself from rapper on the street to Taylor Swift status. How about that?
Now, here's the question I have. So your presentations that I want to get into, and if you're just joining us here on the show, you're watching World Edition, you can visit the website at podtv.tv. You can also like and subscribe to the Pod TV News and Policy channel, newly existing. So make sure you do that. Leave a comment below so we know more of what you want to see. But genocide, strong word choice. Genocide, it's a buzzword. It's a strong word. So tell me a little bit about my data, the data that I've now freely given to all these companies most of my life, and what's happening with that. What is the genocide of our data?
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, and if we put up the presentation and everybody can join us in the scene, if that's possible, fantastic. So it's a great question. We don't use the word genocide lightly. For this presentation, we're tapping into the fact that a very recognized, respected sociologist, her name is Rose Davis, has just published a formal paper. This is peer-reviewed sociology stuff, real academia, on data genocide. And she is a sociologist that has studied genocidal events worldwide. She's actually traveled around the world and she's studied them in different countries. So this is not a simple buzzword. This isn't something we're just throwing around lightly. It's a word that was chosen. And to start off, keep in mind, and I'm going to reiterate here, Brandon, you gave willingly your data away to Facebook, but you haven't given away the rights to your information contained within. So you still own the rights to that information. Let's bring back up the presentation here, and we'll move on. Okay, almost there. It's all right. And if we want to bring in people so they can comment, that's fine. So, Data Genocide, a paper by Rose Davis. This is now available for people to read. The core here is the UN definition of what genocide is, just to show that we're not throwing the term around lightly. It's the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or that group. That's the definition. And there are some basic elements. She brings this forward in her paper, right? There's some basic elements that have to be present in order for it to be considered or for it to be genocide. The first is a mental element, the intent to destroy, right, in whole or in part a nation, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. So there has to be mental intent. I know I'm doing it intentionally, right? You don't just accidentally kill millions of people. You're doing it with intention. And then there's a physical element. Now, if we look at that physical element, there's 5 components of this, right? There's killing members of a group. And what Rose Davis started asking was, digitally speaking, is it equivalent to killing a person when you deplatform them, when you delete them from existence, right? There are some people, Mark pointed out earlier, gamers, they might suggest that their livelihood is more so made online than it is in person. You take away their game, you take away their ability to communicate with their audience, you virtually kill them, right? They become a non-entity and a non-person. And so Rose is asking a very critical question. Is there a threshold where our digital lives are as important as our physical lives, or maybe even more so? It's a very compelling read. But the next step is causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of that group, right? Can you cause mental harm to a person by deplatforming them or by deleting all of their data? The third element is deliberately inflicting on that group conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part. Well, in January, we witnessed an orchestrated attack against a company called Parler, where that exact thing happened. And there's a lot of fallout from that. But that's not just the only example. This isn't always a conservative issue. This is also a liberal issue. If we go back in time to Bill Maher 20 years ago, there was a concerted effort on social media to have him deplatformed. And what happened? ABC fired him. It's remarkable that he ever came back from that. It's a testament to his chutzpah and his backbone. But he was a non-person. He was driven into non-existence through social media. So if you're a liberal and you're saying, hey, winds of change are going in our favor right now, don't be fooled. These tools can be used against any group, any message. The fourth element here, and hold on just a second, Brandon, imposing measures intended to prevent births from a group, meaning in physical, born babies being born and abortion and the like. But how could you do that digitally? And her paper goes into that as well. And then forcibly transferring children of one group to another group. And she parses that as well. So I'll pause there, Brandon. You had a question.
Sorry, yeah, I want to jump in here a little bit because I think a part, and I haven't read any of Rose Davis's work, but I think a part of this conversation also needs to be external stature, right? So one of the things we heard a lot about the deplatforming of somebody like Donald Trump, right, getting banned from Twitter or whatever it was at the time, was that he had a press room of correspondence of reporters who he could call at a moment's notice to any place in the world and hold a full press conference. I would say that I would disagree. I don't think he was deplatformed at all when he was removed from any of those platforms. And when we talk about Parler, I'm going to take a crazy left-wing stance and say that when you sign the terms of service of any service, you're agreeing to abide by a private company's rules. And if you break those rules, sorry about it. We don't have to keep you on the platform. Section 230 or not. That's just, those are the rules of the platform.
Let me challenge you there, because there's this tort called tortious interference. And by the way, Privacy Co-op is on AWS. We signed exactly the same terms and agreements that Parler did, and we're very, very aware of the legalities here. Now, AWS abandoned their own policies. They didn't give Parler a 30-day notice. They didn't give them a public hearing. They denied them a number of elements that were already in that. But I don't want you to think about Parler as the victim here. I want you to think about My Smart Privacy, which is a mom and pop organization out of Austin, Texas, that were driving 70,000 views to their content on their website through Parler. Now, the day that Parler got shut down, their business went poof. It went under. That small mom and pop business was destroyed, and that's one of hundreds that happened because of this deplatforming.
Now,
and when we tie in the fact that Apple and Google also violated their own terms and conditions and their own policies to take that step, that's another thing. But Brandon, I want to set Parler aside, and I want to take I want to go right to Jack Dorsey's own words in the leaked video that we shared here on this show, When on the day after deplatforming Parler, he said, we're not stopping here. And they deplatformed, they deleted 70,000 accounts because they identified these people as being in this loosely affiliated group called QAnon, which didn't have a membership, they didn't have a charter, they didn't have an ability to say this person and that person were members of QAnon. You know how they did it? They took data from Square and data from Twitter and other sources and munched it together, and they said the buying habits of this person, married with some of their comments on Twitter, puts them in this group, and we're going to delete 70,000 people out of existence. Now, let me go back to your question. Did they have a press room? Did they have a platform like Donald Trump? No, these were individual human beings, most of them that were just trying to make a buck and a living, that were destroyed digitally, right? So, right. Yes, I encourage you, if you haven't read this paper, if you're a liberal, you need to read this paper and be scared to death when you read it. If you're a conservative, you need to read this paper and be scared to death. But the quote that we have on the screen is the most compelling from the whole white paper to me. And that is that Raphael Lemkin, the guy who actually coined the phrase genocide in 1947, said, genocide can be considered genocide by the mental element alone. And does that mental element exist today? Oh, man, read the paper and find out for yourself. You're going to be blown away. Go ahead,
Mark. Jay, I wanted to come back to something that I brought up earlier, and I harp on it sometimes just because of being that student of history. And while definitely people have the rights to different opinions, including some that I may not agree with at all, including those in QAnon and places like that and everything, is this anything new? Because like I said, we can look at McCarthy and the Russian Red Scare. We can look
hold that question because you're reading my mind. Give me the 5 quick slides and we'll answer that question. These are going to be 5 rapid fire slides. I just want you to pay attention to the text in red on the right hand side. This is the structure that Rose Davis highlights as being, these are the modus operandi, the things that have to be present in order for a genocide to be considered a genocide, right? And this is from the Preparatory Commission for International Criminal Court in New York in June 30th of 2000. So this is something that took, 65 years to define. This isn't something flippant. This is the real stuff, okay? So the first thing is that the perpetrator is inflicting certain conditions of life upon one or more people. And her white paper goes through and gives examples of how this was achieved in the past and how you're seeing exactly the same things apply to the present, right? So that's very compelling when you can say, here's an element of genocide, and here's how it was implemented in the past, and here's the earmarks of what we're seeing today. Heavily documented. There, I think over 10% of her paper is just in citations alone. The second one is the deliberate deprivation of resources. We're a group of people deliberately deprived of essential resources. And again, she shows the past and then she shows the present on this. The next one is to bring about the physical destruction, the elimination of existence, right? She shows that in the past and she shows that in the present. Then the next one is that such person or persons belong to a particular group, right? Whether that group is more nationalistic, which some of the jingoistic groups that we've spoken about today, like QAnon, might be considered that. Some of them are ethnical. Black Lives Matter could have been just as deplatformed or picked on, right? This is an easy group to identify through exactly the same data points. And that's what we're trying to highlight here. Just because the winds of change are blowing in your favor, don't misuse, don't misunderstand. This is incredibly powerful warfare going on. Now, the next one is the perpetrator intended to destroy. Is there intentionality? And we see the words of people like Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot and Stalin in this white paper. And then you see some of the words of Jack Dorsey and others that are saying virtually the same thing. It's very compelling. We get into manifest pattern of similar conduct. I mean, holy cow, Brandon, you already mentioned Parler. If you look at the fact that, within a single day, they were deplatformed by 3 organizations and they were silenced by 2 others, and then you start looking at the data, there's compelling evidence that this is orchestrated, that there's a manifest pattern evolving. But to hear Jack Dorsey in his own words say, hey, it's not enough that we did this to Donald Trump. we're going to roll this forward and we're going to take out QAnon and then we're going to follow this up with other groups. This is going to be a long-term effort. Those were his words, right? Let's get to emerging patterns. We just kind of covered some of that, and in her paper she says, this is what happened in the past, here's what you're seeing in the present. And now we get to your question, Mark, and it's the question of the day. Why now? Right? I think that you said as a student of history, why haven't we seen this 20 years ago? Why didn't we see it 10 years ago? Well, this is a lady who does genocidal study, and she says, look, there has to be 3 different things present in society as a whole in order for there to be a genocide. And I want you to think of this through the prism of the run-up to World War II. There has to be a global crisis. Was there a global crisis in the 30s? Absolutely. There was a global depression going on, and it had been going on for about 10 or 15 years. It gave rise to the beer hall push in Germany, but you saw equal types of problems rising up in all countries, including the United States. Was there civil unrest around the world at the time? Absolutely. We just mentioned beer hall push, but there were other types of infighting in groups and clamoring and problems happening in every society around the world. And then the last thing we have is that leadership started forming common goals. If you look back in that run-up to World War II, you had Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito all aligning on their common goals is what we later started calling the axis of evil or whatever it was, right? The axis powers.
Yeah.
Now, she starts to uncover, were those 3 elements in place in the year 2020 and in the run-up to 2020? Absolutely. Did we have a global crisis? Heck yeah, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. By the way, many governments around the world use that opportunity to take civil liberties away from their citizens in the name of a pandemic. And a lot of people just willingly went along with it. To this day, in the state of Texas, they're selling our medical data to a company called MTX Group. They paid MTX Group $295 million to take it off their hands for 3 years, so they're still doing it, right? These are civil liberties that we just gave away in the name of the pandemic. The second part is there civil unrest? Well, here in the United States, we certainly had an anti-police movement. We had Antifa. We had Black Lives Matter. That's a lot of civil unrest going on. And there was more. We could point to QAnon, and we could talk about the Capitol event and everything else, right? The bottom line is, yes, in the United States, there was civil unrest. Well, was there civil unrest in other countries? Heck yeah. I mean, France has had a massive population problem with refugees coming in from all over the world. United Nations is involved with that. Has terrorism been on the rise in countries like the Philippines and other places? Absolutely, right? So we are seeing civil unrest all around the world. And then lastly is leadership forming common goals. What were the common goals of big tech leadership? And here, Brandon, I'm going to leave you in suspense and say, read the paper. If ever there was a tease, that was a tease to read.
Definitely will.
Rose's
I want to leave you and Mark and Steve with the last word here. But I would say overall, I think I have to vehemently disagree with everything that's been presented for one reason very simply. It may be because I'm biased, it may be because I'm a hateful leftist, angry sheeple, whatever, but there's one thing I know to my core, and that is, if I am walking into a house party, if I am invited to a house party and I show up and there are Nazis or Nazi sympathizers in that house party, clearly waving their Nazi flags and shouting their Nazi propaganda, I'm at the wrong party and I better go. Yeah. So in my perspective, to kind of answer a little bit, we're talking about with the mom and pop shop that were affected by the views that are getting on Parler. Hey, you walked into the wrong party and said, let me make my money here. If I'm selling lemonade to a bunch of Nazis at a Nazi party, or at a party that's not a Nazi party, but just allows them there, that's the wrong party, and I'm gonna go. And if I don't, I should be deplatformed and I should be taken down. The other thing I want to point out or bring up, and I do want to give you guys the last word because you're probably smarter in this world than I am, is that I think the key part of this, and I think what we're maybe going to see legislated with some of these antitrust suits and all the tech news that's going on, is that I think that the things that a lot of folks don't understand on either side of the aisle, mostly on the right, is that we have the freedom of speech in this country, and that allows you to say whatever you want to say, right? Minus a few words the courts have said you can't say. You can say whatever you want, but it doesn't mean you don't have consequences for what you say, right? If a private company wants to say, no, I'm not going to bake you a wedding cake because you're gay, they can do that. And if a place wants to say, no, you can't go to that bathroom, right, because you identify this way, they can do that, right? If a place or a private company wants to say, yeah, you can't say this, you can't say that, Google, Apple, any of these places that changed their terms last minute or violated their terms to throw some of these folks off the platform have the absolute right to do that. They're a company that can just decide their own rules. They don't.
Okay, Brandon, let me challenge something you're saying right now, if I may.
Sure.
And it's a valid challenge. It's not a debate. So to the Cambodian in the time of Pol Pot that happened to live there, they could have freely moved across the border into China or North Vietnam, right? Pol Pot comes in, he kills millions of people. They could have just left their home, right? They were just at the wrong party. They just arrived at the wrong party. The point that the paper is making is that killing raises to that level of violating and offending to become criminality. The question is that when Google deletes your ability to exist, is that equivalent in any way to physically killing you? That's the question that has to be asked. Now, if the answer is no, then you're absolutely right. It's freedom of choice, and you can just go to Google's #1 competitor. Oh, wait, they don't have one. If you're Cambodian, you could just move into another country. Oh, wait, you can't, right? That's the question that has to be asked, which is, are people forced to do business with businesses that say, if you don't believe in a certain way, if you don't behave in a certain way, we're going to kill you? Well, they can just go to Google's competitor then. Oh, wait, that was going to be somebody else, but Google killed them, right?
And
so that's the question.
Should. I think you're
very valid
right.
Questions that are raised by this paper, and everybody should give it a read.
I agree. If Jack Dorsey had physically pulled Donald Trump down and murdered him in person, there should be some consequences for that. Or Parler, the executives at Parler down. But I do think that there's a difference between freely accessible technology that you can just use on a whim, because you could go to Google's competitor, right? You could have a Hotmail.
Who is that? Who has the browser and the phone and the search engine? Because I'd like to know. I'd like to go to that company.
You can do it, right? You can search on Bing. You can have a Microsoft email address.
I don't know about the last word. But one of the things I was going to ask, and this is actually to Jay, and I actually kind of agree with some of the things that Brandon's saying, is, there's that infamous case of do you have the right to yell fire in a movie studio, in a movie house, if there is no fire and everything? And people have definitely, said that is a time where freedom of speech may actually put people in jeopardy if you're going to yell fire and cause a stampede when there is no fire. So that's where I run into problems with groups like QAnon that have some very racist and some very right wing.
Well, let's Mark, to answer that question, I encourage you to look up Brandenburg v. Ohio. It's a Supreme Court case that creates the Brandenburg test that establishes why you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. It meets the 3 elements of the Brandenburg test. But let's take Madonna saying, yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House lately. Those words did not raise at all to all 3 elements of the Brandenburg test. So I would encourage anybody that's interested in free speech to understand the Brandenburg test and apply it, and you'll start to see that even distasteful language is protected language.
It might be protected,
we're all out of time, folks. So it's been a great conversation. We want to thank Jay and everybody, and we will continue our discussion tomorrow on issues we didn't get. President Biden's response to the dismal jobs report, the continued air bombings from Israel on the Gaza Strip, disruption in the Middle East, and of course navigating the situation of the Colonial Pipeline and what it means for gas prices and gas shortages in the United States. In many ways, as we deal with the pandemic and these mini plots going on, I often feel at the end of the day looking like Jack Bauer, feeling like Jack Bauer looking on the split screen of 24. I was looking around for the Tom Clancy novel Without Remorse, which I'm going to watch this weekend with my father on Amazon Prime. And it's the first time in my life where living our lives is like a Tom Clancy novel. So, but on that note, I want to wish everyone safety out there. If we pray for India, and if there's anyone in the world that's suffering from illness or dying of COVID or any illness, we pray for you. And may the light and love of our hearts always lift us out of the darkness. This is Steve Rao on World Edition. We'll be back tomorrow for another edition of World Edition. And on that note, I want to thank you all, and we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of World Edition on Pod TV. Thank you very much. Have a great day.